Hi, I'm Chad with Move for Guitar. This lesson is from our series Music Theory for Guitar. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about the half-whole diminished scale. First off, if you like the diagrams for everything in this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, Music Theory for Guitar. And this e-guide will be something that you can study and use as a reference for years to come. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to just go download it. This is part 6.11 from our series, Music Theory for Guitar. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So now we've covered the whole half diminished scale, I want to talk about a closely related scale, the half-whole diminished scale. And I'm sure you can tell if you went through the other lesson how this scale is built, which would be a series of half steps and whole steps, just like the name implies. And it's the opposite of the whole half, which was whole steps and then half steps. So it's the same intervals, it's just rearranged. So you're starting with a half step instead of starting with a whole step. And when you lay that out on the fretboard, you get root, flat 2, flat 3, 3, flat 5, 5, 6, flat 7. And again, I could have named this differently. I could have called this a flat 4, and then I would have only had two notes that are doubled up with the same name as far as 2 5s or whatever. But it makes more sense to call this a 3, which I'll talk about in a second. And again, it's an 8-note scale, so you have to double up at least one of the names. So this scale isn't very useful when it's in its natural form of root, flat 2, flat 3, 3, and so on. It's better to rearrange the names or the intervals to root, flat 9, sharp 9, 3, flat 5, 5, 6, flat 7. And that's because the main chords you're building out of this are actually a root 3, 5, which you know is a triad, and in the key of G that'd be a G major, and adding in the flat 7, which you know would give you a dominant 7, so that'd be a G7. So it may seem weird because you're not just skipping in thirds like you do with the other scales. It's a little different with this scale. It's better to rearrange the names of the intervals and use that 3 and create a major type chord. And that's a common thing to do when you have a flat 3 and a 3. To make the 3 the main interval of the chord, because you know that makes major, minor, or diminished. That makes a difference between chords because major is major third, minor is minor third, and so is diminished. And then make this flat 3 instead of a flat 3, make it a sharp 9. And then that makes more sense because our ears are going to really want to hear this 3. When you have a flat 3 and a 3 together, our ears are really drawn to the 3 to hear major instead of minor or diminished. And we'll talk about this more in an upcoming lesson, but you can see you have your dominant 7 chord. You then have a flat 9, sharp 9, and a flat 5, which gives you altered tones, which I mentioned before. So you could use this scale in place of the altered scale or in place of the Phrygian dominant, because you could end up with a G7 flat 5 sound, or a G7 sharp 9, or a G7 flat 9, or you could have a G7 flat 5 sharp 9, or G7 flat 5 flat 9. You can get those different sounds, which are altered sounds. The only altered tone that you don't have is a sharp 5. So the altered scale has all the altered tones, which are flat 5, sharp 5, flat 9, sharp 9. This scale has all of them except the sharp 5. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later in an upcoming lesson. So now if we're going to create patterns, we can create patterns the same way we did with the whole half diminished scale. And we could start with this one with the root, which is a combination of 3 notes per string and then one spot where there's 4 notes per string. And then we could have this one for starting on the second note, which again you're just using 3 and 4 notes per string. There's just one spot where there's 4 notes per string. That keeps it pretty compact instead of spreading out over the fretboard. It makes it a little more easy to manage. And then because it's a symmetrical scale, just like the whole half, you're just going to repeat those 2 patterns over and over. So here's pattern 1. Pattern 1, the fingering is the exact same as pattern 3, pattern 5, and pattern 7. Pattern 2, the fingering is the exact same as pattern 4, pattern 6, and pattern 8. So those are the only 2 fingerings you have to learn, and then you just repeat those over and over again, just like with the whole half diminished scale. Or another thing that's really useful with this scale, just like I talked about with the whole half diminished scale, is to play one big scale horizontally, and then you get a lot of distance on your fretboard, and you can play it pretty quickly up and down your fretboard, and it's a really cool sound. And you could do that with using 4 notes per string. So you go 4 notes per string, drop down 4 notes per string, and it'd just be symmetrical since this is a symmetrical scale just like the whole half scale. And the only place you have to change is when you hit that B string. You have to move up 1 fret because of the way the guitar is tuned. And then I just added 1 extra note to go back to root on the first string. So I'm sure you can see how this is really close to the whole half diminished scale. It's just you're starting half whole instead of whole half. And I'll talk more about that in an upcoming lesson. So that's the half whole diminished scale. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson where I'm going to talk about how to harmonize this scale. And be sure to download the e-guide. All the diagrams are in there. And be sure to subscribe because we add at least one new lesson every day.